Hi, this is Mike Giambattista with TheCustomer, and I'm grateful to be talking again with Mark Smith, who is the CEO of Kitewheel. You'll know him from past conversations, but we were talking about actually a really significant offering that Kitewheel had just announced at the time, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But Mark, thanks for joining me.
Mike, it's a real pleasure. Good to see you again.
Likewise. So, Kitewheel just released a report called the State of Customer Journey 2021, and I've been through it. I'm fascinated by some of the highlights, but the I guess it covers customer centricity in some really interesting ways. But my question, I guess maybe my first question out of many about the report, it really has to do with how you defined customer centricity, because the term has become so ubiquitous that it's almost meaningless to so many people. So what were some of the criteria you were looking for to determine an organization's customer readiness?
Yeah, no, it's a great point, Mike. And, this is just to say a little bit about the report. This is, I think, our sixth or seventh year that we've put this report out. It's based on our data. Well, it's really our customers' data that we aggregate up and anonymize. And find the trends of what's really happening, what real journeys organizations are running. But in terms of assessing them on customer centricity, I think key thing is there's two big areas, and so many software companies are so focused on the technical side of it that
Right.
they miss that there's a whole organizational side. And there's these two big categories of being ready to be customer centric. And we would always lead with that organizational piece. Is the organization ready? Is it even trying to become customer centric? I had a great conversation just a couple of weeks ago, actually, one of the largest banks here in the US, totally reorganizing around a new central chief experience office.
No kidding. That's actually big news.
Oh, huge, massive reorganization. But it's what's required to get this stuff right. And it's really exciting to see large organizations going down that route. And they're still going to have the different product line teams and the different kind of functional teams within the bank. But the coordination of interaction with customers is going to be centralized.
Wow.
So those product lines will maybe control content and have some say over the offers, but whether that offer gets made is now being centralized and controlled by the experience office as a way of bringing together all of the different tracks so that the customer doesn't get bombarded. The customer doesn't get the wrong thing just because one product line has got a target this month that they need to meet. But things are tied together, and the right stuff is communicated to customers and the right experience delivered to customers. And so that organizational piece, seeing that the customer needs to be the center and the focus for the business, is probably on the organizational side, that is the number one thing that we look for.
Sure.
With the companies that we work for.
So I'm thinking of the colossal change management that must be taking place over there, and all of the friction and all of the barrier breaking, and and you and I both know the large scale banking industry is a very slow industry to move. So I think what you're talking about is a huge deal. If and when that company ever gets named publicly and you have some insight, I would love to know more about the mechanics of what they're doing and how they're doing it, because that is the universal problem that I think most enterprises face when trying to implement LTCX.
That's right. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mike. That is the problem. This is the challenge that really has to be solved. The technical stuff's not really that difficult. It's much more how you want to use the technology that governs success. Now, we do look, the other half of the answer to your question is that there is a technical side, in terms of organizations, have to, these things need to go in lockstep. You make an organizational change, you need the technology to support it. Next step organizational, next step technology. And so the things we look for to match that centricity is an omni-channel capability. So truly you can do things in different channels according to the customer's desire. You're not stuck communicating only in single channels with
Right.
customers. The channels can work together. There's a realization that you have to go real time. That's the other big thing that we're looking for to kind of classify an organization as ready, is if you're not acting in real time, the customer's going to leave you behind.
Yeah.
They're looking for real time answers. And so being able to communicate and do the right thing in real time is a key thing. And then focusing on the individual. There's a whole bunch of confusion in the market with this word personalization.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
You know?
Let's dedicate an entire new
Yeah.
conversation to that, because we're going to have to. And I think I have a feeling you and I are aligned
Yeah.
exactly on that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then planning. That's the other big thing. There's a lot of talk about it being the customer's journey and following the customer. And we 100% support that. It's absolutely right. The organization that wraps around the customer and gives the customer what they're looking for and helps them is great. But an organization has to have a plan as well. Right? Don't just do everything the customer says. You've got to plan out the experience you want to deliver. The customer's not always going to follow it, but you need to, nudge them and guide them.
Exactly.
And you need to be in control of that experience. And that's the other big thing we look for, is organizations ready to do that planning and bring it to life.
So before we get too much further here, I just want to mention that there's a link to the State of the Customer Journey 2021 just below this video. So you should download it. That takes you right to Kitewheel's site. But so I was fascinated, well, as I said, by many things, but it notes in the report that you've got more than 10 billion interactions to draw from in just the past year alone. Talk to us about some of the bigger shifts and surprises you found as that data was analyzed.
Yeah, so I think probably the number one, not a big surprise, but a really strong trend, was how much of those interactions were shifted to journeys that were focused on retention and engagement of existing customers.
Okay.
We have 5 big use case areas where we see our customers build journeys, and we analyze our data in those groups. And there's always been a fair balance between retention, engagement, and new customer acquisition and customer service, CX type journeys. But last year, and I say it's not totally surprising because it's kind of for obvious reasons, given the COVID pandemic, organizations really switched their efforts and their focus into this retention and customer care type journey, because that was the key thing and has been the key thing for the last 18 months is the world has changed on everybody. The leading thinkers and the leading organizations are making that switch and taking care of customers. And so 90% of all the interactions we tracked last year were in journeys that were focused on that retention and engagement area.
Wow.
Big jump.
So you're saying historically there was kind of parity between the 5 different kinds of journeys, and now it's roughly that heavily weighted. That's actually a huge deal.
So it's a huge swing of focus across industries. So we saw the same thing in lots of different industries. The other big new trend was how healthcare has really got the customer journey bug. Healthcare has been a very small sector for us historically, but last year came on huge. Now, some of our clients, that's again, it's pandemic driven in that the move to digital in the healthcare space, telemedicine, let alone just support processes for customers, has been big. But also the move in the pharmaceutical sector to start doing a better job of engaging multi-channel with customers and moving from TV ads to much more individualized interactions with customers using digital channels was a big thing. And so healthcare is certainly the fastest growing and relatively new sector for us. And I think it's kind of interesting to see how suddenly they've got going in this whole CX customer journey area. and are now getting just as sophisticated. So one of the interesting things that's in the report is this year, for the first time, we've analyzed the complexity of the rules in the journey. So just, how sophisticated are organizations being in terms of how much data they pull in to make the right decision in real time for the customer. And healthcare are really right up there, just behind financial services in terms of that sophistication. And they've kind of jumped straight into that slot. So way ahead of retail, telco, utilities in terms of just decision complexity.
Interesting, because they're fairly new to the CX game overall as a sector.
Yeah.
So they jumped in with both feet. So you've kind of segued into the question. I wasn't sure I was going to ask this, but you've mentioned certain categories that that moved quickly into retention and are doing fairly sophisticated work with journey analysis. But what about the other side of that? What are the laggards, if we can not necessarily name names, but if there are sectors that are doing well, who needs to step it up?
So that's an interesting question, and I'm not sure the answer, Mike, is really sort of particularly tied to certain industries. Okay, we see good and bad in all industries, right? I think it's a bit more kind of individually tied to the organizations, particularly in 2020, those that succeeded versus those that failed. I think the biggest thing is, were they already underway?
Okay.
Organizations that were already underway with a customer centricity or a digital transformation, a direct to consumer transformation, those organizations were so much better placed than those that were the laggards and had kind of held back from that investment. Those people were kind of caught, there's an expression in England for, well, I'm not going to use, but those folks were caught kind of standing still.
Right.
And the ones that were already underway were able to motor, particularly those who've also moved to agile. So we saw some of our customers, essentially turn on a dime, build totally new journeys, within a few days, drop the sort of old world of, product push and acquisition, and move to care and nurture journeys. Some of our retailers moved into this care and nurture space so quickly. We helped another of our clients, a big energy company, who had terrible trouble with their customer service function. A lot of it offshore, and was essentially closed down overnight. They needed to move all of their customer care online, over a weekend. And basically, because of the real-time nature and their journey kind of thinking, we're able to match that and do a reasonably good job of keeping those customers supported. And organizations that were still traditional had a really hard time. Now, of course, certain industries last year really suffered. And so,
Sure.
We saw really tough times in the travel, hospitality, which, that was not their fault at all. They were just,
They didn't have a customer to map.
That's right.
Nothing for them to do. So, this probably is the forum for this, but I'm also really interested in, you talk about the companies that were already and kind of moving through their digital transformation. I'd love to know what the hallmarks for that kind of digital transformation maturity were. And again, that's probably too deep in the weeds for this conversation, but you're in a unique position to see that, where I think that kind of understanding, if it can be made generic enough to be public, would be invaluable to so many other companies out there that are trying to figure out, what do they do? What does digital transformation mean? And what do they need to do to kind of accelerate that? And again, you're probably in a place to see that just because of what you do for a living.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, Mike. And it would make for a great deeper conversation. We do have a maturity model. It's also available on our website. This kind of 5-step process that we recommend to take organizations into a a world where they're really managing the journey for the customer and doing the right thing. And there's a set of key steps to get there. That's for sure.
So I'll go through it myself just because I'm curious, but maybe we can get another conversation on
Yeah.
the schedule.
Right. Right.
I wanted to touch on something I mentioned a little earlier during our prior conversation. Kitewheel had just announced something that I don't think had been done prior in the industry, which was you're releasing a set of essentially pre-made journeys, if I can,
Mm-hmm.
probably misspeak here a little bit, that were geared towards small to medium-sized businesses, which traditionally are locked out of sophisticated journey analysis just due to cost. So
Yeah.
that happened pretty much right in the middle of lockdown.
Yeah.
But I'm interested to hear what the response has been to that announcement, to that offering, even since the pandemic seems to be opening up, back
Yeah.
to some sort of normalcy.
Yeah. No, the response has been fantastic, and the best thing is it really has done what we hoped, which was open up to a whole set of new and more mid-tier organizations. The fact that they can get going, the technology is there, and you maybe can see I'm going to come back to a point I made earlier. The technology is there to help them, right? So we've had a just huge amount of interest in the offering in all sorts of industries, and definitely spreading out into some newer industries. It's really encouraging to see how much is a bounce back kind of thing. We've got travel and retail companies kind of in big numbers kind of coming into this area. There had been those sectors obviously had been pretty quiet, but they're definitely kind of bouncing back. The proposition seems to have got a lot of attention. We've seen some similarly worded things appearing on other vendors' websites already.
Okay.
Similar ideas of packaging journeys up, which is always a little bit bittersweet to see that.
Right. In a sense, you're being honored, but then in another sense, maybe not.
But the big thing that we're seeing with these clients, it comes back to this organizational thing. Okay, we've got these things packaged up now. That the implementation is much easier, but is the organization ready to do it?
Right.
That is still the key question. And we're here to help them, and we do. But very quickly, the conversation goes with the businesses that are contacting us and interested. Conversation goes to, yeah, well, okay, and this is what we can do. This is what the journey will do. Is everybody ready on your side for that?
Right.
Where are the problems going to come when these silos start getting broken down? And so very quickly we go into those same conversations that we're used to having with the very large companies, as they're starting at that point and moving our way. Some of these companies have got the journey kind of buzz, and now it's forcing them to realize, we've got some organizational stuff to do here.
Right.
This is going to cause some internal friction, exactly as you were saying earlier, like that's got to get, even in a mid-sized organization, you got to work around that.
Yeah,
so
and those aren't easy tasks. So I'll just say anecdotally, after you made that announcement several months ago, happened to be in a conversation with one of your competitors. I mean, I speak to people in this space.
That's what you do.
And I just thought that the response to your announcement was interesting. It was essentially, I'm paraphrasing badly here, but basically they were saying, I've been telling my company we should have been doing this for years. It's a great idea. And
Right.
So the market response doesn't surprise me. It seems like it's just a really, really smart way to proceed. So, and then the other thing I wanted to mention too is, in a separate conversation, I was talking to somebody who is a known quantity in the CX world. You may know him, but I won't mention names just because. But echoed something that you and I have already been talking about here, which is, the technology is one thing, but what he looks for as point number one in any engagement is organizational readiness. And he looks at it from the standpoint of, do you have complete C-suite buy-in? And his take on that is, if you don't, then talk to me after you do, because otherwise I'm just wasting your time. So
Yeah,
big stuff there.
absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And that's going right back to the start of the call, Mike. This bank, it's a C-level position that's instigating this change, and that's maybe something we've talked about on previous calls. But that is a typical factor in a lot of our large company work. It's a CEO initiative, or certainly a board level initiative,
Right.
to drive this. It has to be, because it has to come top down.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, those barriers won't be broken down, and the collaboration won't happen.
With all that, Mark, it's such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for fitting me into your schedule. You mentioned earlier it's the last day of the quarter, so I know you're crazy.
Yeah.
But look forward to doing this again. There's so much we could be talking about, and I, for one, will be paying close attention to Kitewheel. Thanks a million.
Great. That's great, Mike. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me. It's